people don't like my truth, it's my truth, then they don't have to do business with me. They don't have to listen to me. They don't have to follow me. But that's not going to stop me from advocating and speaking my truth for people who don't have a voice. Change the narrative and close the wealth gap. And that's where it starts, is educating and helping to empower a group of people. We all have prejudice. We all have biases. It's what we do with those and how we learn from them. What can we do to even the playing field? How can we, as a community, both Black and white, sit down, have a conversation, and figure out how do we become equal?
Ready? Ready to rock and roll? Is that action? All right.
Okay. That's right.
All right.
Absolutely. Go. Go.
Hello, everybody. It's Jason Will with
Go.
So this is a real estate podcast, but we talk about leadership, personal growth, and becoming the best version of yourself. Leadership, check 1, 2, check 1, 2. Growth, best version of yourself.
Go.
So this is a real estate podcast. Well, let's welcome everybody back to the Impact Agent Podcast. And for those who are just now joining us, this started out as a real estate podcast for real estate agents, by real estate agents. It's about real estate training, and it's evolved. I mean, you are an up-and-coming realtor who is ready to make a name for herself in the Mobile County market. And I think, we'll probably touch on some real estate stuff today, but this is way more about the impact of being a Black woman in modern America and the impact that's had on you and the impact that you seek to make on the world, because you are somewhat of an activist, right? Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say. And
we should say that this is the second time you've been on the podcast. You were here the first time you made an appearance on the podcast. You were trying to raise awareness for one of our local communities that is falling on some hard times, right? So tell us just a little bit about, let's raise some awareness about that community just real quick. Is there the organization that you work with that supports this community and how people can get involved?
So the organization that we formed was the Plateau Magazine Point Community Redevelopment Corporation. And my dad and I formed that company, I guess probably about almost 2 years ago now. And you can go on my website, restorepmpc.com.
Restorepmpc.com.
Right.
Okay. So the conversation we had, it started out, we were talking about slavery.
Right.
And I mean, that's how that community got started.
Right.
Right. So it's heavily rooted in slavery. And here we are, June 2020, dealing with, the country's dealing head on with racism right now.
Yeah.
And so you and I had been talking about getting back together to do a podcast about Christianity and faith. And I want to talk to you about faith and business. And, we just haven't been able to get our schedules lined up. And it seems like there's a fateful component to that, because right now I just feel like now more than ever, this is a great time for us to sit down. You've got the poster child for white privilege sitting across from you.
Right.
So, there's a lot that I don't understand that I want to understand, and what the leaders on both sides, responsible leaders on both sides, what they're calling for is conversations. They're saying, who are you sitting down with to talk about your side of the story, or how you were raised, or what your parents brought you up to believe? And we talked about that yesterday. One of my favorite memes that I see when anytime we have a flare up racism in the country is, that none of us are born racist, that it's taught, and so that's the whole catalyst for the conversation is ignorance, right? It's just doesn't mean you're stupid. It just means that you don't understand, and we fear what we don't understand. So I wanted you to just kind of take us back, if you would. So you have admittedly said that you have nothing to hide. You're an open book.
I am.
So for those of us who are listening that have no idea what it's like to automatically be born, you're not born with a disability. You're not born with any sort of mental or physical handicap, but to be born, just for being born black, to be different. Tell us what that was like.
I was, if not the only, one of very few that were in my class when I went to Julius T. Wright, when it was still an all-girls school. And the first time that I realized that I was different or black was when I got a phone call from a group of kids, and they asked me, because I wore pigtails, they asked me why I wore my hair like that. And then their next question was, or their next statement was, well, you know that you're the N-word. And I paused. I immediately just hung up the phone because I was done with the conversation, and I went in. I remember this vividly. I went in and I told my mom what they said, and I cried. And my mom said to me, the N-word is an ignorant person. And she said, are you ignorant? I said, no. She said, you don't know everything, but she said, you're not ignorant. She said, that's an ignorant statement for them to say. So that was my first real experience, and I was probably in the 3rd or the 4th grade, with racism and the fact that I was different. Moving forward to my high school years, I graduated from UMS, the only black in my class. And by that time, you know, I was used to it, had heard it. I was not okay with it, but I was not as bothered by it. But then I ran into the problem where people would say things to me like, oh, you're pretty for a dark-skinned girl. And that came from both black and white. So I say that to say that we all have prejudice, we all have biases. It's what we do with those and how we learn from them that matters. And as an adult, my latest experience was with my son when he was called the N-word by a person who he considered a friend. And out of all three, that was probably the most hurtful, because in my mind, I was hoping that we had come farther than that. But then that was just a reminder that we were still in that same place and we had so much farther to go.
How recently was that?
So probably about a year and a half ago that happened.
So after your 3rd grade experience, which I think could be semi-traumatic,
yeah,
I would say. Again, you know, I'm sitting from a place where I have no idea what it's like to walk in your shoes. From that point, it was basically just kind of comments that could maybe be perceived as insensitive, like you're pretty for a black girl, or, you know, maybe people would make more comments about your hair, but it was just maybe a curiosity or just some ignorance-laden comment that just didn't come from a bad place.
Right.
And you just kind of have to learn to kind of brush those off. And so nothing really major or serious happened that you can recall up until motherhood. I mean, do you feel like it's been harder for you to succeed as a person in the workforce?
I consider myself a privileged black person. My parents were able to send me to private school. I went to pharmacy school, to a private college. Because of my school and my parents' connections, I've made connections and contacts that, you know, and I've been able to do things that a lot of black people would not be able to do. So my experience is different from a lot of people in the city's experience. And but my hurt and my heart is still the same. You know, the hurt is still the same.
Well, I would imagine that maybe, do you feel like out of jealousy for your privilege that you've lost some relationships among people that would have been your friends, you know, of the same race?
I think so.
Yeah.
And the lack of their willingness to get to know me for who I am and not because of who they think that I am.
So I have seen some black leaders here in the last days and weeks who have made statements about culpability on both sides and the fact that many of us are different for many different reasons. And it could just be a political viewpoint and that we're demonized for our opinions even. And so I do think it goes way deeper than ethnicity and the color of our skin and all those things. It's just we need to do a better job of the way we treat each other, just in general.
Right.
Right? And I
Right.
think we all, and this is where I try to police myself because, I have historically been a person who is judgmental. Like I just rush to judgment, and I know I need to come from curiosity first. I could hear a strong Southern accent as a younger man and just assume you were stupid. I mean, that's just being real and raw. As the years have gone by and I've gotten a little wiser, I've realized that you can't judge a book by its color or its sound or its clothing or what kind of house they live in or what kind of car they drive. We're way better off as human beings and the relationships. Because you think those people, like you're a pretty incredible person. So whether those people are black or white, if they have sought not to get to know you, it's their loss, right? I mean, and who knows what you guys could have done, what kind of benefit or, impression you could have made on each other's lives.
Right.
So, well, let's talk about this hurt that you've been experiencing, because it doesn't sound like, it doesn't, if you haven't had an issue with a law enforcement officer.
Personally?
Yeah.
No.
And do you feel like that's just because you have been brought up in this environment where you just know that there is just this lack of maybe strife is a good word. You didn't grow up in a conflict,
Right.
A household of conflict or a household that instilled in you that, outside the four walls of your home, it's us against them type of thing.
Right. Exactly.
So you don't come from a mindset of oppression. So you don't have that sense going on, but you are a witness to that happening to people that look like you.
Right.
And so what does that do for like your heart and your mind and how you approach it? Like what's your role in this?
A wife to a black man who it has happened to, it scares me. And the mother of two young black boys who it may, hopefully after all of this, it won't, but it may happen to. It scares me. It terrifies me. And the fact that they can be told to do all of the right things, like put your hands on the steering wheel, say yes sir, no sir. But at the end of the day, there's still no guarantee that they won't make it home or they won't get arrested or get roughed up. And there's no reason for that happening other than the fact that they were black.
Yeah, we're talking about fear of doing normal things.
Right.
Driving to the grocery store. The most ridiculous.
Running.
Yeah, the most ridiculous of which is going for a run.
Yeah.
Hey, Mom, I'm going to go get some exercise.
Right. Which my son asked me to do a day or two before I heard about the young man that was killed running. And I just, in my gut, I was just like, no, let Mom go with you. And I heard that and I was like, that could have been Manny just running. Because we do live in a predominantly white neighborhood. And that could have been him.
Yeah, it's a crazy thing. And we talked about, Pastor John Gray, and he was relating his personal experience with a sit-down discussion with Stephen Furtick, and just saying how he has experienced some very harsh words from his neighbors, some threatening words, and just as a father, whether we're in the midst of one of these flare-ups or not, it's always in the back of his mind.
Right.
His safety and the safety of his family members, always. It's always present. And so I think could be a glaring example of this privilege that we experience, that we don't necessarily live in that fear every single, like we don't have to live in fear just for the sake of being in, just
being.
Yeah, it's crazy. And so it's interesting that you were probably blindsided, I would imagine, when your son came to you and said, hey, a friend of mine who I considered a friend.
Right.
Just referred to me as the N-word. Now, were they in a disagreement? Or?
No.
Did he think it was cool, or did he think?
I think he just thought it was cool, and they were just at lunch. They weren't in a disagreement. He later said that he felt like he could say it because it was in songs, and he felt like they were that cool. And I told him, no one should ever be that cool, you know? And that led me to the question of, if you're comfortable enough to say it out loud in school, what conversations are you guys having at home as parents, as siblings, or what is the conversation around race at your house? And so I ask you that question. What is the conversation around race at your house as a privileged white person?
I was very blessed to be raised in a home where my dad taught me early on. He was like, listen, there is no difference between, we're all humans. We're all, equality just across the board. And, so that stuck with me. I think, other members of my family, not so much. My parents got divorced and then remarried. And so I have been to church functions in very rural communities in Alabama where I haven't seen it firsthand, but I've heard that they're members of the KKK. I have seen members of the family we married into go to church one day, bow their heads in praise and worship, and then go home and see something on the news and use N-word. To have employees, or go to a workplace that's diverse and engage with those people like they're equal, but then go home and say disparaging things. Or maybe it's just to experience a little road rage, and you have a couple of extra words to say there, based on what the person looks like. So I have definitely seen the hypocrisy and the double standard in my life. And then, we were also talking about yesterday about the fact that this is a time for people to lend their voice, to let their voice be heard. That we're all leaders in our own respect, and to be silent is, to be really on the wrong side. To be silent is to put yourself on the position of people that are not helping the situation, but rather hurting the situation. And I expressed to you honestly that the post that I have made since, this all happened, since its most recent incidents, because it's not just one, it's plural. Before I hit submit, that thought's in the back of my mind that I'm going to pay a price for this. Somebody's going to see this and think less of me or not want to do business with me. And I have experienced that as a person who has been a supporter of our first black president since the beginning. I have been silenced about, certain political views. And so that's unfortunate. But, that is, the world that we live in. And that goes back to my comment about just being demonized, and not being able to speak out politically. And most of the coaches and trainers in my industry, if you, here soon start going to, if we ever get back to a world where learning-based events open back up and we can actually go to these big forums, you will hear them say, religion, politics, don't ever mention it, no matter how passionate you are. So they're instilling silence because they know it's going to hurt the sale, which is going to take food off your table. So that's complicated, right? What do we do about that?
I had a coach to tell me that if those people who don't appreciate or don't want to hear what you have to say leave, they weren't for you anyway. So, and then that many more people will come and support your business and support you and what you have to say. And so I believe that. And so if people don't like my truth, it's my truth, then they don't have to do business with me. They don't have to listen to me. They don't have to follow me. But that's not going to stop me from advocating and speaking my truth for people who don't have a voice.
We've seen some pretty powerful things lately where people have stepped down from positions. Like, what could I do? What example? And these are people that are they got tons of money in the bank. So like them stepping down isn't going to hurt them, maybe they won't be able to, upgrade their yacht this year or something. But it is powerful. They're like, I'm a person of like mega privilege.
Right.
What can I do to set an example to my kids? Well, I'm just going to resign my position on a board, which I'm sure has some derogatory effects on stocks or whatever, or their authority to make decisions about things. But just them stepping down sparks a conversation. Why'd you do that? And so their kids ask him, like, why has Dad got more free time? Well, he stepped down from his position. Well, why did he do that? Well, here's why I did it. And so I thought that was like super powerful for people to do that. So, and you mentioned that, you hope that things are going to change, and that, when I'm sure when you were in the third grade and that incident happened, your inward incident happened, that your parents might have thought like, hey, I think we're probably past this. Like, this isn't probably going to happen. And so here we are again, many years later, having that same conversation. I wonder if we're going to get past this time. What's in your gut? Do you really feel like we're going to make some good change here? Lasting change?
I think we are going to make lasting change. Millennials are a very, very powerful group and they are for change, and they have a voice in this fight. And I think that's the difference. And also, when people are willing to put their money behind something, then that also is very powerful, because your dollars is where the real change comes. More money needs to be put into these communities, and more money needs to be funded into schools, into jobs. I mean, just everything, because that is also part of the problem. These areas don't have people that make a living wage. They have to work 3 and 4 jobs to make fit to equal what's considered a livable wage, which is only $15, $16 an hour.
Right.
And a lot of these places don't have internet access. So you have kids who will spend all summer not being able to learn anything after being out for COVID for the last 3 months, even farther behind, because they don't have internet access and they don't have access to tablets or computers.
Yeah, I mean, that's stuff you would never even think about.
And these are the things that people can do and also get behind to change the narrative and close the wealth gap. And that's where it starts, is educating and helping to empower a group of people.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I mean, you think about right now, we're sitting in a real estate office that's virtually empty, that, I'm trying to grow, but I've got tons of room here where I can invite parents in to bring their kids to use the internet. So, I mean, we've got a pretty powerful Wi-Fi signal, and we've got a lot of desk space that's not being used, but that's something from my seat of privilege I don't even think about. Like, just even offering internet access, what difference that could make. And, how I know we could get sponsors to, bring in lunch for these kids. So, I mean, that's powerful stuff, and just go in the power is in the conversation.
Exactly.
So if we had never sat down, whether we were mic'd up or not,
right.
I'm learning ways that I can get involved that I had no idea, because I'm so consumed with everything I got going on, that this is something that would be almost effortless for me to do. That would make a big difference.
Right.
To have just a little internet cafe for kids where they could come learn.
Right.
So it's interesting. Can you share with us, and again, you pump the brakes here on what private and what's not,
okay.
But is there something that your husband has shared with you just over the years that's just scared the living daylights out of you?
Yeah, it was when we first got married, and he had gone out with some friends, and it was almost daylight before he got home. And he didn't answer the phone. I called his friends. And they had them out on the curb, running their license plate, running their license, and they were out. They didn't run a red light. They didn't run a stop sign. They were just out and about. And they stopped them.
Stopped, detained, and
Frisked, handcuffed.
For being out and about.
For being out and about. For being out, hanging out with their friends, and headed home.
Yeah. And, you know, it's that sometimes in a situation like that, you know, the men or women involved will flee. You know, and sometimes that's, I just assume, sometimes that's out of fear for, I've got warrants out for me, but sometimes it's just a fear of losing freedom.
Right.
You know, when you're stopped, frisked, detained, handcuffed for doing things that plenty of other, they weren't the only car on the road that night, you know, and so, you know, it's just, that's worth letting that sink in for a minute. And the people that, you know, we got people spitting in protesters' face just for protesting. You know, I want to talk about, you know, this is something that you talk about, like the conversation that's going on that I see behind the curtain of my family. And so this you just kind of brought this back into my memory, was the Colin Kaepernick thing. You know, I've had members of my family just completely ban professional football. Like, we're not watching it anymore because this black quarterback has started this movement where these other black players are taking a knee, and that is a sacrilege against our nation and what it stands for. And so I'm going to give you my thoughts on it, and I would love to hear your thoughts on it. And I would really, I don't know what Colin Kaepernick is doing right now, but I would really wish he would get on the mic somewhere and start talking. And maybe he is, and we just haven't, or I haven't heard it. But my thought process is, when I saw that happening, what I questioned was, why are people getting so upset? That's what the soldiers fight for, so that we have the freedom to protest and the freedom of speech. So they're getting angry for these men exercising a right that people have died to protect. So I don't get it. And, you know, we saw it here recently in the news where Drew Brees, who has had people, I know they fought, I'm not sure if they gave their life serving the country, but, you know, he feels strongly against people doing that, his fellow teammates even doing that, and he's caught a lot of criticism for that, because the line in the sand was drawn that one has nothing to do with the other. And that's where my argument comes into play, is that it's the same argument. You know, they're exercising a right that your father and grandfather, whoever it was, fought to protect. So we should celebrate. It doesn't mean we have to agree with what they're doing. And so that's my point. It's like, I may not necessarily agree with them doing that, but I celebrate their right to do it. And so even if you had that mindset of, I wish they would find a different way to protest, you know, instead of during the singing of our national anthem. But man, aren't we all grateful to be able to do that and not be killed or persecuted or thrown in a cell to rot and die? So where do you think, you know, the people that are on the side of the fence where they take offense when they see that, what are they missing?
I think they're missing the point. They're missing the fact that we do have a right and we do have the privilege to protest. They're looking at how he's protesting instead of what he's protesting about. So they're missing the point. And I was listening to Van Jones on Ellen the other day, and he was talking about lawlessness and looting, and how they are both looting and police brutality are both forms of lawlessness. But why is it that when black people loot, or when people loot, it's worse than when somebody kills an unarmed black man? Until this moment, looting, if you look back, like with Rodney King, people looted and it was bad and they are bad and whatever. And then, but it's still lawlessness. And no one likes lawlessness. And so it's a matter of perspective, I think. I say that to say it's a matter of perspective. And just like with Colin Kaepernick, it's a matter of perspective. That you think one group of people thinks that it's disrespectful, while another group of people thinks that it's just a sign of freedom and the right that he has to protest peacefully. But everybody's missing the point behind why. Why are they looting? Why is he protesting? Why?
Well, and I'm not an expert on Colin Kaepernick, but I do believe that he would probably consider himself a black person of privilege. I think he was raised by white people, white folks, so it's not just this singular thing. There is this ripple effect because there's many now that this has come up. This is his whole, movement has experienced this resurgence. So you hear professional football players on interviews, radio or television, talking about there's a good chance that man would still be playing in the NFL had he not taken it upon himself to protest. And so, okay, what does that mean? Millions of dollars? Does that mean, a Super Bowl ring? Does that mean some legacy factor? So it starts a conversation, or it should start a conversation that's much deeper than that's respectful or disrespectful. What is this person giving up and feels so strongly enough to lay it all on the line? There must be something that we don't understand. There must be some deeper reasoning behind this that we don't get. And that brings up another point, which has been heavily talked about here recently, is that, we want to feel good. I think predominantly as a society, Americans just in general have this entitlement that, in terms of being humane, like we're more humane than everybody or the rest of the world. We treat each other better, and we have this kind of rose-colored glass look at the way we are as this kind of superior society and culture, whereas, gun violence, and there's a lot of stains on our nation. And to have to recognize this and talk about this would be having to admit that we still have a lot of work to do. And people just don't want to do that. Or they want to say it's their problem, not ours.
Right.
If they would just get more educated, or, if they wanted to not just collect welfare and food stamps and get a free ride, then things would be better, And so that's where we are. I mean, those conversations are still going on.
And, truth be told, there are more white Americans and rural Americans on welfare than black Americans. And, that myth has plagued me for years, that it's just put on us as black people that we're a certain way and we want certain things, or we don't want certain things. Like, we don't want to live in a house. We want to live off the system. None of that is true. Everybody wants their own home. Everybody wants to be successful. Everybody wants to be educated. But when you're constantly being beaten down and put down and never given a hand up, then you get frustrated and tired. And so you just sometimes succumb to your environment and you do what you have to do to survive. And that's something that's a conversation that I think that needs to be had, is what can we do to even the playing field? How can we as a community, both black and white, sit down, have a conversation and figure out, how do we become equal? And people have said that Corona has been the great equalizer. I don't, because I wonder if there had been no Corona, would there be this conversation? Because everybody's in the house, everybody's sensitive, people are sick and dying, and they don't care what color their nurse is, what color their doctor is, what color that policeman or that fireman is that saves them at that time. So if Black people and people of color are good enough to save you when you want them to, why aren't they good enough to walk alongside you and have the same equal things and opportunities that you have when we're not in a pandemic?
Right.
And that is a question that I want people to think about. If we're good enough to save you when you need us, we're good enough to have the same things that you have and the same opportunities that you have.
You know, that's been a powerful thing that I've witnessed over, the last several days, is that people have been asked, protesters have been asked, why are you out here risking your life? I mean, you could contract the coronavirus, and both white and black have said, I think this is more important. Me being here, me participating in this historic event, or the cause that I'm here to shed a light on or to raise awareness to or protect or whatever their motivation is for being there. It's more important than their own health.
Because at the end of the day, as a mother, black or white, if you close your eyes and you hear that, "Mama, they are killing me," that is your child's voice. It's not a black voice. It's not a white voice. That is your baby's voice. And that has pricked the heart of a lot of mamas, because there's nothing more painful than your child hurting and not being able to do something about it. And so I think that a lot of people's eyes have been open to all of the injustices that have been going on just lately because of Corona and because of George Floyd.
Well, let's talk about one more instance where I think people are missing the point. And the question that people, I think, that first comes to their mind when these events happen, where there is, alleged police brutality or injustice, is that the person deserved it. Because they were, they did have a rap sheet, or they were previously incarcerated. They had a record. They were in the commission of a crime, when it happened. And we know that's not always the case, but I think it tends to be pretty frequent that they'll go, even if somebody is just a passenger in a car, that person has committed crimes in the past. The world is better off without them. I'm sorry it maybe happened that way, but they would probably commit this crime again. Like, how do you process that?
Everybody deserves due process. So the person who went into the church and killed all of those people, Bible study
in South Carolina,
he deserves due process. So why doesn't a black person who robs a bank or does whatever deserve that same due process? That man gets to sit in jail and live, and his family gets to go see him. George Floyd's family doesn't get to go see him. Why? What makes his life more important than George Floyd's life when he killed many, many people and George Floyd killed no one? But he's dead. And this man gets to live his life out in prison and possibly get out. So who decides who's more important? Why have we decided, or why have people decided that the white guy was more important and he deserves due process? And a handful of people decided that George Floyd was being combative and doesn't.
Over $20.
Over $20.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy to think about. And that's why I think we're seeing leaders say, listen, keep protesting.
Right.
Stay out there in the streets and keep doing it.
Right.
And people are have a lot to risk being out there because the coronavirus, this pandemic is not done.
Nope.
And I think it's like so powerful. I mean, people will die because of this cause.
Yes.
Because these are conversations that need to be had. All right, I want to ask you about one other thing.
Okay.
Because you were asking about my experience.
Right.
Like what's going on behind the curtain on my side.
Right.
And so one of the things that has just come to mind is, and this has been relevant because we have seen people desecrating Civil War memorials and calling for, and this has been going on for years, calling for states to remove, the Confederate flag from buildings, government buildings, and logos and emblems and all these things. And my clear position on this is that their position first, let me put that out there, is that whether it was a just war or not, or whatever people were fighting for, that people died. And there's a heritage thing to it. Like my great-great-grandfather, whomever, fought and died in this war, and he was maybe fighting to protect his family or his land or his livelihood or whatever. It had nothing to do with race. And that it's a part of history, and we shouldn't just take history down and wash history away from the fact that it did happen. It's a part of our history, and it's not. If you look at it just from a historian perspective, it's not bad. My argument is that it's been sensed, and it still does today. It is used for evil, and it's used for hate, and because it is such a worldwidely recognized symbol for hate, that it should come down. And perhaps these monuments belong in a museum. I mean, I don't think anybody is saying we shouldn't acknowledge that these things happen.
Right.
But that we shouldn't glorify them.
Right.
So if one of my white friends was here and he was making this argument with you that, that this is a part of our state's history, forget our nation's history, a part of the state of Alabama's history, and they had people in their lineage who lost their life during the Civil War and were great people and never owned other humans. They had their own economic reasons maybe for fighting. What would you say to them about the fact that it hurts you to see these monuments or every time you see these symbols, and why you feel strongly that they shouldn't be out there and glorified in the public?
Because people still use them as symbols of hatred. People who spew hate fly rebel flags and Confederate flags. And so you associate that with hatred. And as far as the statue, it's a distraction at this point, I think, because people are focused and protesting about it shouldn't be taken down. It shouldn't be taken down. What's going on right now is bigger than the statue at this point. And it is a distraction. And that's not a conversation that needs to be had during this time. There are so many other conversations and things that need to be talked about that are of greater importance. And right now, the statue is a distraction because people are bothered by it. Just removing that removes a little bit of the distraction, and it allows people to continue to protest, and it allows it not to be said that it was vandalized or completely destroyed.
Well, it's like saying that all these protesters are violent.
Right.
Or all these protesters are looting.
Right.
It's just a distraction.
Right.
It's to distract people so they'll just click on something else, or they'll change the channel, or they'll just go, oh, it's just, it's those people doing that again.
Right.
And here we go again.
Right.
So we need to keep the conversation centered on the fact that we need to heal as a nation and as a people, not be divided. And we're in just a incredibly polarized and divided time right now.
Yeah.
And so, just to see people, and we've said this over and over during this conversation, but see people risking their lives. I mean, forget about the pandemic. People have been shot, like in the face.
Yes.
For feeding protesters.
Yep.
Just wrong place, wrong time in the line of gunfire.
Yep.
I mean, it's crazy. You think about, and police officers too have lost their lives. There's a lot of people who are paying the ultimate price. And we need to keep talking through this. Yes. And I appreciate you joining me.
Thank you. I appreciate you asking me. And I hope this is the first of many of these conversations.
Me too. So let's plug your business before you go, because you gave your most valuable time as a real estate agent, or your most valuable asset is your time. So if somebody's looking to buy or sell on the Alabama Gulf Coast, because you do Baldwin County and Mobile.
Yes.
Tell them how to get in touch with you.
They can reach me at 251-406-0316, or they can check out my website at CheneleSalesMobile.com.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jay.
I want to encourage everybody that has listened to this conversation to sit down and have their own conversations.
Yes.
But more importantly, if they were just share this with somebody who they think needs to hear it. Like, as you said, I think the point of this podcast, if I had to select one word, needs to be perspective. So if they were to share this podcast with somebody who just needs to hear somebody else's perspective, somebody else's point of view on this, that it might be that spark that gets them to even consider what they've been taught, what they've been told. Just as my friends would make this argument for heritage, while I think we respect that, we all respect our heritage and we should respect our heritage, that doesn't necessarily mean it's right. That doesn't necessarily mean that these people that we should, have fond memories of and love and respect even long after they're gone, and respect their legacies, that they always did everything right and they always taught us. Maybe they were, it was the way they were raised. And it's just been this, when I think of heritage, in some ways I think of this hereditary ignorance. And it's just a cycle that needs to be broken.
That's it.
It doesn't mean they're bad people. It just means they were taught some things that just weren't right, and it's just gone on, and it's gone on long enough. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Impact Agent Podcast. If you like the show and got something out of it, please like the Impact Agent Podcast on Facebook and rate and review the show on iTunes or anywhere you listen to podcasts. This really helps us grow the show and helps other agents find it. Please share it with your friends and coworkers as well. Want us to deliver the show to you via email every week? Then email me at jason@impactagentuniversity.com and we'll send you the show every week. Please let us know what you think about the show, what you like, what you don't, or possibly make a suggestion about a topic you want to hear. Email me at jason@impactagentuniversity.com or leave us a message on Facebook at Impact Agent Podcast. Until next week, everybody be productive, safe, and happy, and always keep learning. This podcast is produced by Johnny Gwynn at Deep Fried Studios in Mobile, Alabama, and is paid for and powered by ImpactAgentUniversity.com.